As a part of the Hilton Head Island MLK Celebration Program, we have a short interview with Emery Campbell. Mr. Campbell's topic for today is Sense of Self in Place, Unmasking My Gullah Heritage. Good afternoon, Mr. Campbell.
Good afternoon. Good to be with you.
The first question we have is, what do you mean when you talk about sense of self in place, unmasking my Gullah heritage, and how it relates to the MLK celebration?
Well, when I think of a sense of self, I think of myself knowing where I came from, knowing who I am, knowing all of my surrounding kinfolk and neighbors, and the place itself, knowing the land, knowing where I am, what makes up that community and what makes up the land, how we use the land itself. And I can unmask my heritage by sharing it with the world. Whereas being in isolation sometimes on an island like where I grew up, the rest of the world was so far away, and you tend to mask yourself when you enter that world. But once you know who you are and have a sense of self in place, you can share it with the world.
Now, the topic for the MLK celebration this year is good trouble, after John Lewis, who said we need to get in some good trouble. What does that mean to you as a Gullah growing up on Hilton Head Island, South Carolina?
Well, we were always taught how to behave and not get into trouble. Good trouble, as John referred to it, meant that you did things that were good for the neighborhood or good for the people around you, and enhance life for everybody. And so for us, good trouble would have been, sharing a bucket of fish, going into the waterways and doing things that your parents may not would want you to do, but when you did something for the good of the community, you were appreciated, and it encouraged you to do other things for other people. And so in the case of good trouble, we think we did some good things and got into some good trouble even in the Gullah culture.
Now, when we look at the history of Martin Luther King, we see that he had an impact on all types of cultures, and even where they were homogeneous, meaning they grew up with people just like them. Why did you think that MLK and the civil rights movement had such an effect on these type of cultures, including the Gullah culture?
Although the Gullah culture was pretty much isolated along the coast of South Carolina and Georgia, and didn't always interface with mainstream America, we knew certain things that made us as a people different from mainstream. But at the same time, we were part of that mainstream that were affected by certain rules and regulations. When I grew up, I knew about segregation because our one-room school was all Gullah, and there was a school down the street that was all white. And even though we were very, very, very happy about being ourselves, we could tell that there were certain advantages that we did not have. And so when Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement began, we got a peek into the larger world, and we knew that it would affect us positively as well. And so we were happy to be a part of that movement, and eventually we became a part of that movement.
On MLK today in 2021, what do you want people to know about the Hilton Head Island Gullah history? What is important when we think about this particular day?
Well, I think I think we can think of emancipation, freedom. You know, in 1863 and January 1st, the Emancipation Proclamation was read in the Sea Islands as one of the first places in the South. And just across the street, across the river from Hilton Head, some more than 5,000 people gathered to hear the Emancipation Proclamation read by somebody who was sent from Mr. Lincoln's White House to read it to us. And it's because we were contrabands and had already been, this area had already been occupied by the Union. We were just wanting and wishing and hoping that the official word would come. And so emancipation was a big thing. We knew about it. We celebrated it even before the Civil Rights Movement. And now this movement was just an addition to forward movement in terms of becoming a part of the larger society and becoming more and more free, getting rid of segregation, getting rid of the restriction for voting. And those were the springboard to being a part of larger society.
Now, you served as the executive director of the Penn Center, and we always hear the story of Martin Luther King coming there. Why did he come to the Penn Center in St. Helena Island, South Carolina?
You know, Penn School, which became Penn Center later on, was one of the first places where newly freed enslaved people, people who were free from slavery, began schooling, were free to get educated. And so the Pennsylvania missionaries came in and started this school on St. Helena Island. And it was the only place from 1862 all the way to the 1960s where integration was allowed. That is, what we would call in those days, mixed racing, mixture of races could come together on one site and communicate, discuss various problems, and try to solve it, including the problems of education. And so when they started these schools to help people learn how to read and write well enough to become registered voters, these little sessions were held throughout the South, but one of the places that was picked was Penn Center. And when Andrew Young and Septima Clark, one of the local activists from Charleston, began these schools, Penn Center was one of the first places where they began these schools. Andrew Young always talked about how he admired the way we used our culture to free ourselves. The clapping of sounds and the old spirituals that we would sing at Penn Center. He said that was something new to him, where people sang as a part of freedom. So Penn Center became one of the highlights places where civil rights workers would gather and embrace not only the Gullah culture, but also embrace the freedom that allowed them to promote freedom throughout the country.
And do you have any final thoughts on your topic, A Sense of Self in Place, Unmasking My Gullah Heritage, as we celebrate MLK this year in 2021?
Well, I think you would find that during the civil rights movement, Black people began to look for their identity. They began to try to connect to the African roots. They began, wearing their hair natural. They began to embrace their skin color, embrace their music, embrace their food. They began to look more seriously about their ownership of land. And so Penn Center had always been doing that up to that point. And as they gather at Penn Center, they would include all these aspects of the new life of Black people and become more identified with their roots and their history. And Penson always promoted history of Black people and history of the Gullah people. And so now we've got, you know, Gullah as being one of the guideposts in getting freedom throughout the country. You hear, wherever you go, you hear people talking about Gullah culture. Then when they reach back and search into Gullah culture, they find that these are people who have a pretty good sense of self, pretty good sense of place, where they grew up and what place is all about, and a pretty good sense of their connection to their origin, which is West Africa.
Thank you for your time today, Mr. Campbell.
You're quite welcome, and happy holidays. Happy Martin Luther King birthday.